Gyroscopes are fascinating things. When they're spinning very fast, they achieve this phenomenon called rigidity in space. What rigidity in space means is that they maintain the orientation at which they're spun continuously, regardless of what's going on around them. So, they're like a little Zen master of engineering. Let me demonstrate what I mean. Let's suppose that this CD is a gyroscope and it is spinning right now, spinning incredibly fast. And no matter what's going on around it, it spins in the same orientation. It doesn't change its orientation. Okay? The way they're built, they have gimbals, and those gimbals allow free movement in all possible directions so that the gyro can be free to ignore the housing. Doesn't matter how the housing is placed, the gyro will remain, like I said, like a Zen master. So no matter what's going on around the gyro will remain rigid in space. Now, there are two types of motion associated with gyros once you've established that a gyro entails spin. So you're not including spin in that, okay? So, two types of motion. One is real and the other one is theoretical, okay? Now, the real motion is called precession, which means when you exert a physical force, an outside force, on any of the gyro's housing, you have a corresponding movement of the gyro. So, for instance, if you press this way on the gyro will move like that. As you turn, the gyro will turn like this. And if you push this way, the gyro will turn like this. Again, depending on whether it's spinning this way or that way. Okay. Now, the gyro, that motion, precession, is based on physically exerting pressure on the housing, the gyro housing. Okay. Precession. The other motion associated with gyroscopes is called apparent drift. We refer to this as just drift. Drift is supposed to be displayed by the gyroscope when the gyroscope, being rigid in space, is traveling around, for instance, the Earth. As the gyroscope is spun in one place on the Earth, say vertical to the ground, like this is right now, vertical to the ground, and as the Earth rotates, a relative point of view, or you might refer to an indexical point of view, would show as the Earth turns, the gyroscope remaining rigid in space independent of the Earth, and the gyroscope would do this. And this is referred to as drift. Okay? The gyro is still in the same orientation in which it was spun, but relative to the Earth, it seems to have turned. Okay? Relative to the Earth. Let's show this with an actual Earth globe. Here's an Earth globe. So now we have a gyro, and the gyro is vertical, and it's this way. Okay? This way. At the equator. And as the equator turns, the relationship between the gyroscope and the surface of the Earth changes from vertical to parallel. That's to say, it starts off vertical, and as the day wears on and the Earth turns, it stays rigid in space, and it reaches a point where it's parallel or horizontal to the ground. See? Let's reverse time. Okay. That is drift, or apparent drift. One of the great things about theoretical physicists when they make lies is that they call them very legitimate sounding things. For instance, did you know that the true horizon is false? It doesn't exist. What you might refer to as the astronomical horizon, that's the horizon, that's the real horizon. The true horizon doesn't actually exist. Neither does true north. You have two norths. You have the magnetic north, and then you have, which is really just a phenomenon of magnetism, that's the compass pointing in a direction, and that's called magnetic north. And then you have geographic north, which is the centralmost point on Earth, over Mount Meru, in the center of the flat Earth, if you want to know. But let's imagine that you still think you're on a globe. If you're on a globe, then this drift must happen. And what happens with people who have grown up believing that they were on a globe and have never actually stopped to question what they were taught? And this isn't to say that all physicists and teachers lie. They can just simply misinform by virtue of not knowing that they themselves have been misinformed. Okay, it's part of the reason for keeping lies secret. So apparent drift doesn't appear to happen at all. Apparent drift apparently doesn't happen. It doesn't appear. It, you know, see what I mean with the tricky language? So if it did happen, relative to your point of view, a gyroscope over a 6-hour period would do this at the equator. The further north and south you go, the more of a cosine, the more of a tangent that would be included, okay? Relative to how far, okay? In the North Pole, it would do this. See, this is what it would do in the North Pole. It's like this. In the North Pole, it would do this, and at the equator, it would do this. And not between north and south, it would combine a variety of the two. Apparent drift. Apparent drift doesn't happen on the Earth, and anybody can demonstrate this. All you need is an actual precision gyroscope and a period of time. You see, it's supposed to drift 15 degrees per hour. That's this way at the equator and this way in the north. 15 degrees, or a combination of the two, dependent on your latitude. 15 degrees per hour. So if you spin a gyroscope and you watch it for an hour, it should drift by 15 degrees. And by 6 hours, it should drift 90 degrees, no less. And there's no circumstance under which a gyroscope will precess naturally, which means move without an external force being exerted on it. None. Absolutely none. There is no circumstance in which a gyroscope will precess, which means move due to external force, without an external force. So, what if somebody filmed a 6-hour period of a gyroscope with no external force causing no precession or no counter drift, which is what pilots think happens and submarine captains think happen. There's no precession and no drift. Now, this is important, this small detail. For a gyroscope to stay static relative to where it is, so for instance, where I am right now, instead of actually turning like this as the hours pass, what must happen for it to remain static relative to its location is a perfectly balanced force must be placed on it to counter the apparent drift by causing a negative precession. That's to say, let's say this wanted to drift like this, there would have to be a force exerted making it drift like that instead, so that it would appear to remain static. Without an external force, that doesn't happen. And you can say it does, and say the Father Christmas is real too if you want, but in the real world, engineers know that gyroscopes do not drift. Now, let's go over this again. There is no drift as time passes and a gyroscope spins. This means this, which is a theory after all, it's a theory of where you live. This idea is an idea. It's also a theory. It's an invalid theory, but it has been pushed as if it was valid. You know how sometimes a government will coax the population into believing that it's under threat for that population to go to war? You know how governments do this sometimes? Well, that would be a government lying to its people, or at least allowing its people to be lied to. And this happens, unfortunately. Well, in the same way that a government will lie to its people, a government will allow its people to be lied to about other things, including theories. So this is an idea, it's not a theory. You see, an idea can't really be argued against because it's an idea. Unless you try to make it physical, there's no problem. You know, you can have an idea about unicorns or dragons, and it doesn't matter what people say, you can still have that idea. But a theory is something different. A theory must be falsifiable for it to be valid as a theory in the first place. See, that's the difference between an idea and a theory. An idea doesn't require falsifiability. It doesn't have to have any element that could prove it to be false. But a theory does. That's the difference between the two. A theory says this is true. An idea doesn't necessarily say that it's true. So, a theory says this is true. Perhaps. And if you can find something that demonstrates that it's false, then that is no longer a theory. It becomes an archaic belief. You know, like humours or spirits causing disease. It becomes an archaic belief. Once it's established that it's false, it changes from a theory to an archaic belief, and very quickly people distance themselves from it. And believe it or not, some doctors used to believe that bad spirits caused illness. And they later became a bit more technical, a bit less witch doctory, and called that not so much bad spirits but bad humours. So they would use leeches to leech out the bad humour, and they would administer mercury to cause the body to react, because the reaction meant the bad humours were leaving. Anyway, the point is, those things were proven false when bacteria was discovered and viruses. Until that point, it was accepted, not really as a theory, just accepted. So it turned out it was false, and it became an archaic belief, and that's how we refer to it now. The archaic belief that bad humours cause disease. Bad humours. Yes, as in humorous, as in sense of humour. This is now an archaic belief, and you're not really very wise to still push this. It is an archaic belief because it has been demonstrated to be false. Not just by seeing things that are too far beyond the curve, but scientifically and demonstrably by gyroscopes. And down in the description you have a real-time 6-hour film of a gyroscope spinning at 53 degrees north. Interesting, huh? The reason the 6-hour film is there, real time, is for all of those globelings who would say that the following 20 seconds time lapse of that 6 hours, showing absolutely no drift, which is absolutely necessary on a spinning globe. The 6-hour footage is there to stop those people who would claim that it is humours that cause disease, it is a globe that's spinning, from saying every now and then when the time lapse has been taken of this 20-second footage, which would mean if it was filmed as a time lapse, that every so many minutes a shot was taken, then in between the shots it was being continuously adjusted for 6 hours. Okay? The 6-hour footage is there to say to those people, give over, it's not bad humours that cause disease. Enjoy. And after you've enjoyed that, watching what this flat earth looks like. The flat earth, the earth is flat, and it turns out that all those flat earth retards are much more intelligent and much more perceptive than all the people who believe that this is a real version of the world in which we live. Because you see, the retarded flat earthers look at the real world and take what the real world says as truth, and these guys behave as if what the real world says isn't really true, including the gyroscope. So enjoy the footage from 22 miles up in the air, and enjoy seeing how the sun illuminates locally. Thank you.